It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and wouldn't you know it, after a late night game, Joe Mullinax and Damichael Cole talking to you about Grizzlies Suns, previewing Grizzlies Clippers, and an interesting look into the mind of Taylor Jenkins when it comes to a potential closing lineup. All that and more on this episode of the show. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. And before we get too far, I just want to acknowledge and accept how proud all of you should be of me. That
he beat the washed allegations.
That I have stayed awake this late. We are recording. It is 1:17 a.m. on the East Coast as we record this episode, and I am still awake. You should be proud of me. Everyone should be proud of me. Shout out to naps and staying up late here on Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Between the two of us, over a decade of Memphis Grizzlies content creation experience, you have come to the right place when it comes to Locked On Grizzlies. We are happy to have you with us, whether it's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts. Make us a proud part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. You can also check us out in our free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Words from me, fantasy basketball advice, NBA at-large analysis, and so much more. Go to lockedondaily.com and check out our free daily newsletter. Damichael Cole, a big win for the Grizzlies in the Valley of the Sun. Kevin Durant looking very much the part of a all-time scorer. Yep. Broke the 30,000-point barrier in this contest. And yet, the Grizzlies pulled out a win. Ja Morant looking very much like the Ja Morant of old. The biggest thing for me coming out of this contest, partner, is the best player for the Grizzlies this entire season has been Jaren Jackson Jr. so far. This has been one of his quietest games as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies this season. You could tell the Phoenix had game planned against him. They were double-teaming him, forcing the ball out of his hands. And yet, Memphis still found a way to win. There's a lot, and we'll talk about this throughout the episode. You know, are the Grizzlies a contender? Who do you fear in the Western Conference? That sort of conversation. Watching this game, and one of the reasons I'm still awake recording this game, is I'm excited because even in a limited Jaren performance, you have a Grizzlies team knocking off a Phoenix team that is a realistic potential first-round matchup for the Memphis Grizzlies. That is something to be positive about, even in the wake of a controversial trade deadline, trying to figure out what this closing lineup will look like. We'll talk more about that later on in the show. But it's hard to come out of this game against Phoenix thinking anything other than these Grizzlies are a real contender in the Western Conference.
Yeah, for sure. This game kind of was an embodiment of their depth, right? So many guys had moments, so to speak. I don't think one guy just completely took over this game and won it for the Grizzlies. Ja Morant, 26 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists. He got to the line a lot. I think it was 8 of 19 from the field, but he had 12 free throw attempts and made 10 of those 12. So look at that, everybody. Ja got some whistles. It's possible. If you didn't think it was possible, it is possible. So even on the night where he shot over 5 from three-point range, Ja still 26.7 rebounds, 6 assists. He had several moments where he kind of took control. Desmond Bane, you remember it was early in that fourth quarter. The Suns got within 4 points. I think it was 8:39 left. And then Desmond Bane comes up, a couple of possessions later and calmly off of a screen knocks down a three-pointer, and then he drops off an assist. And boom, 7-0 Grizzlies run to get that lead back up to 11. He finished the night 20 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists. Zach Edey, we talked a lot about him and Jalen Wells in the last episode. And Zach Edey in this game, 3 offensive rebounds, and he kind of, personified in a way. And there were many more guys, and we'll talk about a couple of them over the course of the episode here that really stood out on the rebounding end. The Grizzlies had 20 offensive rebounds in this game. They had a 20-7 offensive rebounding advantage. One of the reasons they won this game, in Zach Edey's presence. Again, he only had 3 offensive rebounds, but you had to account for him. Jaren Jackson Jr. was aggressive. Vince Williams Jr., who we'll talk about a little bit more later, 7 points, 9 boards off of the bench. We talked about it a little bit in the last episode about the fact that Vince Williams, the playmaking and the rebounding, are 2 things that kind of make him a guy that you feel comfortable with him being on the floor. And then you just keep going down the list. Brandon Clark gave you 14. Santi Aldama came out cooking. Like he did most of his work early in the game in the first quarter, but he really helped the Grizzlies build at what one point was a 19-point lead. So they led by as many as 19 points. You get to the second half. The Suns kept battling, and it was a game where I never doubted that the Grizzlies would win. But you know the saying, Joe, you keep playing with fire, you eventually get burned. And you're watching the game, you're like, man, look, you're within 4 points. You're letting the Suns team get too close to the point where it's just going to become a game of shot making. And when that other team has Kevin Durant, anything can happen. You know, they did a great job against Devin Booker in this game. I think he had 17 points. He wasn't really aggressive as a shooter. You know, I noticed that over the course of the game was more, you know, in the point guard role. But Tyus Jones, you know, I think he had 11 and 9. But if you watch the game, like Tyus was -9, and it was notable. So basically, the Grizzlies' depth, I think, really showed itself in this win. This is one of those games where it wasn't just, you know, one player we can look to and say, man, he put the Grizzlies on his back in this one. There was so many different good performances at different stretches of the game.
We talked a lot about the rookies on the last episode of the podcast, and it was another game where their minutes were limited, right? Jalen Wells only played 19 minutes. Zach Edey,
foul trouble for him.
20 minutes, foul trouble for Wells in particular. Kevin Durant had him in a vice, and it was fun to watch the different ways that the Grizzlies tried to address the Kevin Durant dilemma. And again, we're at the stage with this team where you have to view them through the lens of a postseason run.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they're going to have to do in the postseason. Foul trouble hits. Who's going to defend this guy? Who are you going to trust with this assignment? What kind of scheme are you going to execute to try to limit, in my opinion, the greatest offensive player in the history of the National Basketball Association, Kevin Durant? 34 points on 18 shots. It was a clinic watching that guy play basketball. And I do believe that there's positives in that experience, not just for Wells in terms of his struggling, but in terms of Vince Williams Jr., who we'll talk more about. There were reps there, Damichael, where Santi Aldama and Scottie Pippen Jr. were trying to check Kevin Durant. That is all going to be valuable down the road in terms of experience for a Grizzlies team. They haven't been in the playoffs in a couple of years. Obviously, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Ja Morant. Some of these guys have playoff experience. Some of these Grizzlies players do not. Trying to maximize these reps against a player of the caliber of Durant matters a lot this time of year.
Yeah, and you said something important there. Some of these guys don't have that playoff experience. It's not just some of the guys that you're going to rely on to guard the Kevin Durants in the playoffs, to guard, you know, the Shai Gilgeous-Alexanders, the Luka Doncic's, those guys, Jalen Wells, Vince Williams, even Gigi Jackson's going to get some of his run in those stretches. Those are the 3 guys that you're probably going to depend on even more, and even maybe even Scottie to a certain degree. Those 4 guys are the guys who you're going to depend on as those perimeter gnats, as I like to call, you know, pests or whatever, so to speak. And none of them have that real postseason experience. So these are valuable reps. These are definitely valuable reps. We saw Scottie in this situation. Saw Gigi. We saw Vince all guarding Kevin Durant. They all took their turns at him. I liked Vince Williams' physicality. You know, in that matchup, you know, you could say he was overly physical because he was hacking KD a little bit, without a doubt. I thought Jalen Wells was as sound as usual, but Jalen Wells, of course, being a rookie and going against these savvy vets, like he's prone to, the whistle interfering with him a few times. Like, it's the foul calls that I'm sure you noticed it, Joe. Like, the foul calls that Jalen Wells gets called against him. Like, I'm not saying they're not fouls, but like, he's not just like hacking dudes. Like, the Dylan Brooks fouls, you remember those Dylan Brooks fouls. Even the most diehard Grizzlies fans couldn't debate those. Whereas with Jalen Wells, you're like, come on, ref, let him play a little bit sometimes. So he got a couple of those, but it's good reps for him as you get into that postseason mentality and mindset.
It was good opportunity for Jalen Wells to get those reps and to see what a veteran player like Kevin Durant is going to do to him in the postseason. All of that matters this time of year. The Grizzlies, barring an unforeseen collapse, will be a playoff team. It's time to start thinking about how to best prepare for that run. And this was a good game for that. I am optimistic coming out of it. Let us know on X, at Damichael C, at Joe Mullinax. Hit us up on YouTube in the comments. How are you feeling? Big win for Memphis in Phoenix. Obviously, just one game, but a solid win all around. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, an interesting closing lineup. It was not the same as the starting lineup for the Memphis Grizzlies. Damichael and I are going to break that down next. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by WayFair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or you just want to give your space a new look to start the new year, WayFair has everything you need, all within your budget. Are you looking for new furniture? WayFair has an amazing selection that makes it easy to find pieces that fit your individual style and budget. There is amazing hassle-free delivery, even for larger items, and Wayfair's site is so easy to navigate. You can find everything that you need in no time. Give your home the refresh that it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Make sure you're checking them out as soon as you can and give your home the refresh it deserves heading into the spring. Damichael, the closing lineup for the Memphis Grizzlies against the Phoenix Suns, because it was close-ish.
Yeah, got down to 4 points.
Absolutely, points. Yeah. A couple possession game. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., that should surprise no one. But again, the closing lineup different than the starting lineup. Jalen Wells, Zach Edey were the starters for the Grizzlies at the technical 3 and 5 positions. Mm-hmm. Closing out the contest were Vince Williams Jr., Santi Aldama. Now, you and I are on the record of saying that we are big believers in Vince Williams Jr. So Williams Jr. being the guy in that spot, I have a feeling you and I are going to be simpatico. We're cool with that. Santi Aldama being the guy next to Jaren Jackson Jr. is fascinating. Offense with Santi, he had a really strong first quarter, as you alluded to earlier on in the show. But of course, Brandon Clark is the better defender, more versatile, does a lot of different things from that position. You can play Gigi Jackson as the small ball 4 as well. So how did you feel, again, because this is a sample size that we simply do not have, Damichael. This is a team that has not been healthy in this way for 18 months. We're seeing for the first time how Taylor Jenkins, the head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies, plans to deploy some of these weapons. What did you think of that closing lineup? Morant, Bane, Williams Jr., Aldama, Jackson Jr. Do you think that might be the group moving forward? Do you think Taylor Jenkins was just trying to accumulate some data? Where are you at with that final 5 being so different from the starting 5?
Yeah, I think that was a solid group to close the game with in this game, against the Phoenix Suns. I think, and what we'll see over the course of the rest of the season is, it'll be a field thing, for Taylor Jenkins, which is I am perfectly okay with, because there will be nights where Gigi Jackson is going to have a 26-point game, and it's like, all right, we're going to use Gigi in place of Santi and or Vince or whoever the case may be. It might be Gigi and Brandon Clark in the next game. Or it's going to be nights where Jalen Wells, has a night like he did when he played in Sacramento and he's shooting the ball really well. And it's like, okay, we're closing with Jalen in this game. As long as you have one of those guys, and I'll put those 3 as Jalen, Vince, and Gigi. Those are the three guys that Taylor Jenkins is kind of – they're different level defenders. I think, Jalen is probably the most sound defender of the three. I think Vince is probably the most from a playmaking standpoint defensively. He's the one that's going to get his hands on the ball. He's going to draw the most charges. He's the best playmaking defender of those three guys. Gigi Jackson has the most physical skill of those three guys. So with Gigi, you're still hoping he gets there eventually. But 6'9" with the way that he moves, the fact that he put on 20 pounds, like the physical standpoint that a lot of guys just ain't going to bully or jump over Gigi Jackson. So you get three different kinds of makeups with those guys. So I think one of those will be factored in. And then it's going to be that Santi and BC, how they flipped out. I think it works perfectly in this game because we talked about it a lot, Joe. What we talk about a lot with these matchups is the more physical teams. I think if you're saying if this is Houston, if this is, maybe in the Clippers, like if this is the Clippers or one of those type of opponents, you're probably leaning Brandon Clark. And if you want more size, you're thinking the physicality of Zach Edey. I think you're leaning in that direction. But the Suns, they had Bol and Kevin Durant out there closing it. Katie is arguably the most gifted scorer that we've ever seen, but he ain't known for, putting his shoulder in dude's chest and knocking him into the third row. And Bol isn't known for that either. So I'm fine with the way that they closed. Jaren Jackson Jr., Santi, it makes perfect sense. I think it was a good call on Taylor Jenkins. Look, Taylor Jenkins gets a lot of flack for these different lineup combinations or whatever the case may be. I think he pressed the right button in this game in particular with going with that group. But I think, Joe, you might be thinking more of the long-term viewpoint here. So I'll say this and then I'll pass it off to you. But if I had to choose, so to speak, I'm leaning Vince Williams of those three guys. And Vince shot 1 of 6 in three-point range. He missed a lot of three-pointers in this game against the Suns. But you know what I always say? Look at the back of the card. Back of the card shows you this guy was a very good three-point shooter in college. He was a very good three-point shooter in the G League. And so far in his NBA career, if you look at the bigger sample size, he's been a very good three-point shooter. 1 of 6, I'm throwing that out the window. Let me see if that's going to be, a consistent thing over the next month or it's just a bad stretch. So, but what we know, what he can do is that rebounding, those 9 rebounders, that wasn't fake. He's shown the ability to do that. And Vince Williams made a bunch of big plays in this game. And he's just that added a different level of a playmaker. When I see Jalen Wells is sound. Jalen Wells not going to make those stupid mistakes where you're like, what are you doing? He's going to more than likely, he's going to be in the right spot. He's going to put himself in a good position to compete. Vince Williams is going to take a little bit more risks. Gigi Jackson is definitely going to take some more risks. So I think that's the difference in those type guys. But right now, closing lineup, I like Vince, especially when we talk about those physical matchups where you get to Brandon Clark and Santi and Zach Edey as well.
It needs to be Vince Williams Jr. It needs to be. I am a big fan of what he does physically. He is not afraid to rebound. He is what a lot of folks see John Conchar as. He actually is it. He is him in that productivity. He also is able to create offense off the dribble. Yep. And that is the difference between him and Jalen Wells for me. Wells can defend. Wells can hit the three. It was good to see him knock down a couple of threes early on in the game. Santi Aldama gets a lot of credit, deservedly so, for his first quarter contributions to help build a Memphis lead. Jalen Wells hit a couple of threes that first quarter that really helped as well. I am good with Wells starting still, if that's the way Taylor Jenkins wants to keep continuity. It needs to be Vince Williams Jr. And I think that Clark and Santi, because of their veteran presence, the way that they've both played a decent amount of basketball to this point in the NBA, I think that you can kind of alternate offense, defense if necessary. Vince Williams Jr. needs to be that guy because he can defend, because he can hit the three, and because he can facilitate offense. We haven't seen that consistently from Wells. We haven't seen that from Gigi Jackson. Those are things that they can theoretically do down the road. They can continue to develop their skill sets. I know that Vince Williams Jr. can do those things, and that is winning basketball. Vince Williams Jr. can contribute to winning a basketball game without scoring the basketball. That is not true of Gigi Jackson. To a lesser extent, that's not true of Jalen Wells. I think Vince Williams Jr. needs to be out there for that reason. Let Damichael and I know if you agree. Are you cool with Vince Williams Jr. and Santi Aldama being those closers next to Bane and Ja and Jaren? Do you think it should be somebody else? Let us know on X. Hit us up on YouTube as well. As we close out this episode, it is the last game before the All-Star break. The Memphis Grizzlies will be in Los Angeles taking on the Clippers. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by OpenPhone. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night. As your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where OpenPhone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal lives separate. For just $15 a month, which is essentially the cost of a few coffees, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything that is happening with your business phone number. OpenPhone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and action items the second that you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring that you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OpenPhone.com/LockedOnNBA for 20% off 6 months. OpenPhone.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have an existing number with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. Make sure you go check them out. All-Star break upon us, Damichael Cole. I know that you are about to go and travel out to the West Coast to check out Zach Edey and Jalen Wells and Jaren Jackson Jr. participating in the All-Star break festivities. Before we get there, we have one more game. And as we talked about on a recent episode of Locked On Grizzlies, this is going to be a very different contest, right?
Yep.
The Phoenix Suns, it's a good matchup for Memphis. Not necessarily the most physical team. The Clippers are the opposite end of the spectrum. This is going to be a fight. The Grizzlies are going to be in for a lot of physicality. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard looms large in terms of the superstar potential. How he gets used heading into the All-Star break is worth keeping an eye on. So what are you watching for going into Grizzlies Clippers tonight?
Yeah, can the Grizzlies take control of the style, battle, right? This is the game, right? This is one of those games. We talk about them in these physical teams. Some people could say it's against the contenders. I say it's the physical teams. I don't think they necessarily just struggle against contenders, because they can beat certain contending teams that I think aren't the most physical teams. It's the teams that, like the Clippers, like the Grizzlies average over 123 points a game. The Clippers only average 110. And it's not because they're a bad offense in any way. It's just they do it differently. They play at a much slower pace. They're going to slow the game down. And they make it muddy. Ty Lue teams have always made it muddy. It's a hallmark of his style. They're third in the NBA in steals per game. That was the same thing that OKC was good at, right? The Grizzlies aren't bad themselves in that regard. I think they're sixth in the NBA in steals as well. But we talk about the way that this team turns the ball over. You got to take care of the ball against a team like this, especially with Kawhi Leonard back. So you got Kawhi Leonard back into the fold. They made a couple moves. They're not going to have Ben Simmons yet. Ben Simmons is not ready to roll yet for the Clippers. So that would have been fun seeing him make his debut against Memphis and see what that would look like. But Zubac is been a problem, right? Sabonis, it's those type of centers that have they've played the Grizzlies, and their physicality has really been a problem. Zach Edey, it's time. You need Zach Edey for this one. You need him. Jaren has really kind of stepped it up, from a physicality standpoint, in terms of matching the physicality of these dudes over the course of this season. But yeah, this is a big one. This is a team that beat Memphis earlier this season in Memphis, right? That game was at the crib. That was at FedEx Forum. The Clippers did it their way. by the way. Like it was a game where the Grizzlies only scored 110 points. So we just talked about the Clippers averaging 110. They won that game 114 to 110. And on top of that, everybody wasn't healthy, but you had your full starting lineup. Ja played, Jaren played, Dez played, Zach Edey played, Jalen Wells played. All those guys played. So I think this is one of those games where you say, okay, let's kind of prove that we can beat some of these teams, that try to impose their will physically, as so to speak. And it starts with this matchup against Zubac. I think that's the tell-all. You know what Zubac had in his last game against the Grizzlies?
A lot.
It was 20 and 20. I mean, and Zach Edey wasn't even, bad from a rebounding standpoint. I think Zach Edey had 14 boards, but he shot 1 of 8 from the field. So we're not. When I say you need Zach Edey to be good, I'm not just talking about winning the rebounding battle. You need him to be physical. You need him. I mean, 1 of 8 was mainly because he struggled around the rim, against Zubac. Zubac had 20 and 20 in that game. Norm Powell had 29. James Harden had 21. There was no Kawhi. This is a big one, Joe. This is you win this one. You go into the All-Star break and you say we can beat it. We feel really good against any style in the Western Conference.
I am curious to see how Zach Edey responds to the physicality of Zubac, right? Because obviously when you're 7'4", 290 pounds, you have some advantages. Zubac is one of those bigs that is almost as big as Zach. Plus, he combines the physical strength, the actual attacking in the post. He had a really strong game the last time that he was out there. I'm curious to see how James Harden continues his renaissance late in his career. A really impressive season for him out in Los Angeles, an all-star season. Absolutely. Obviously, Norm Powell, the scoring that he's done for the Clippers, how that translates with Kawhi Leonard back. So much balancing out for Memphis here. And what I mean by that, Phoenix was not the physical threat. The Clippers are the physical threat. If the Grizzlies were the 2 seed and Phoenix was the 7 seed, I'm picking Memphis in 5. That's a relatively easy series win for the Memphis Grizzlies. If it was Memphis as the 2 seed and and Los Angeles Clippers as the 7 seed, that's a much more difficult matchup for them.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
And this is gonna sound dumb at surface level, but bear with me.
Mm-hmm.
You got James Harden, you got Norm Powell, you got Kawhi Leonard. All 3 have been the first 2 is James Harden and Norm Powell have been prolific scorers this year, and James Harden's been a prolific scorer his entire career, but Norm's really stepped it up, and we know what Kawhi is. Kawhi has been very so far, right? Like he's had those moments where it's like then he's had some moments where it's like it's going to take some time to work him back into it. Like if you've been watching the Clippers as of late, Kawhi has not seamlessly worked his way back into this thing. It's been, kind of a process, and that's expected, but that's the reality of it. I know this is Locked On Grizzlies, so everyone's not watching closely what they're doing over there on the West Coast, and it hasn't been seamless, but they've had the peaks, right? How do you match up the Grizzlies with them on the perimeter from a defensive standpoint? Because Jalen Wells guarded James Harden in that first matchup, right? It was all over James Harden. And he had some wins early on. And I think James Harden, especially late in the third quarter, fourth quarter, started to kind of, his craftiness, that savviness, he started to win a little bit more in that matchup. But that's another thing that I want to point out that could be a concern. It's not a concern if you say, hey, guys, just got to step it up, right? Because you're not taking Ja and Dez off the floor. Like closing, starting, I'm not even suggesting such a thing. I'm suggesting that Ja's probably going to be guarding Norm Powell. He's going to have to bring it because you can't leave Norm Powell. The attention's got to be there. He's going to knock down some shots. Dez is probably going to have to guard James Harden. Like I'm just looking at it, right? Like because you throw Jalen Wells on James Harden and say we want him guarding the point of attack, and then you throw Desmond Bane because of his physicality on Kawhi Leonard. There's kind of a conundrum there, Joe. What do you think? What do you do?
The way that you described it there is exactly how I would do it. I would go Ja on Powell. I would go Wells on Kawhi, Bane on Harden. That is how I would handle it if I were in charge.
I'm switching. I'd go Kawhi. I go Bane on Kawhi because Kawhi isn't going to move around as much, and I want Bane to have as much energy on the offensive end.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
I get yours, yeah.
I'm cool either way. And that's one of the most fascinating things about this particular game is it's a window into what Taylor Jenkins is thinking. Because, again, between now and the middle of April, the Grizzlies are going to be a playoff team. How does that make sense with this current iteration of the Memphis Grizzlies roster? How do they implement these pieces? How do they execute scheme on both ends of the floor? I kind of hope it's a close game because I want to see what Jenkins does in crunch time with a fully healthy group. Yeah. It's a chance for us to have a better window into what this Grizzlies team actually is. So it's going to be a great way to close out the All-Star slate. Make sure you're checking out the game and make sure that you're following at Damichael C on X, at Joe Mullinax on X. Make sure that you're with us all along the way as we head into the All-Star break. Speaking of the All-Star break, no promises because it's a 9:30 Central Time start on Wednesday. Damichael has an early flight out to the West Coast for the All-Star game. I might be cashing in my not washed card right now. There may not be a Thursday episode of Locked On Grizzlies for a variety of reasons, but there will eventually be an episode before the week is over, Damichael.
Yep.
Let's talk about the All-Star break. Let's talk about Jaren Jackson Jr. being a part of the All-Star festivities. Obviously, Jalen Wells, Zach Edey, and the Rising Stars Challenge. What are you excited about heading into the All-Star break with this team?
Oh, man. There's a lot. I'm excited about the upcoming stretch of the schedule. And we're going to talk in detail about this, but I'm such a you got to give me a big sample size before I just come out and say these big declarative things that people like to say. And quite frankly, I'm almost a little annoyed by this whole they can't beat the contenders thing or whatever. They're 4-1 against top 5 in the Eastern Conference. They've been pretty bad against the top 5 in the West. But if you're telling me right now, Houston and Grizzlies in a series, I don't really think Houston beats them. I've been saying that all along. It could go either way. The Lakers look completely different. It's not the Lakers with Anthony Davis. So that's a TBD team right there, right? We have OKC is OKC. I'm completely different level. We haven't seen a healthy Denver Grizzlies matchup. Neither team has been healthy for those games. So we don't have anything to go off of. So this whole they can't compete with the contenders. What are we basing it off of? Are we basing it off that one loss against the Clippers or that game they lost against the Luka-led Mavs that aren't the Luka-led Mavs anymore? So look, I'm just saying this upcoming stretch, that's what I'm looking forward to. Not this game against the Clippers, and then after you get back from playing the Clippers, you get some time off, and then boom, right out of the gates, you got the Pacers. You get Cleveland in there. You got the Knicks in there. You're going to learn a lot about this team before March gets here.
And that's a good thing. The more you can develop data and get that information, the better with this healthy Grizzlies team. So, Damichael, heading out to the All-Star weekend festivities.
Yeah.
We will talk about that and so much more on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, whether that's Thursday or Friday, TBD. There may not be a Thursday episode because life happens, but there will be an episode before the week is over, I promise. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing. Wherever you get podcasts, we're proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, make sure you're checking out Damichael and I and Locked On Grizzlies each and every time that an episode drops. Also, make sure you're going to LockedOnDaily.com, subscribing to our free daily newsletter. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. NBA analysis, fantasy basketball advice, and words on the Grizzlies from me each and every day. LockedOnDaily.com. Check out the Locked On Grizzlies tab. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay safe. Have a wonderful Wednesday, a wonderful end of the pre-All-Star schedule. We will be back with you to close out the week, either Thursday or Friday. Make sure you're with us. Until then, stay locked in. This is Locked On Grizzlies. See ya.